This module, we learned a lot about consumer debt. Consumer debt is a huge problem in the country. Certain things are okay, and you'll have different varying opinions, and that's what you're actually going to do in your biblical discussion is read about Dave Ramsey. There's some conservative Christians who think any kind of debt is bad. They will encourage you not to get a house, not to buy a car, not to do anything that you can't pay straight cash for. I'm going to let you give your opinion on that, and we'll discuss it after we're done with this exercise. What I do want to talk about is a few things that maybe didn't get hit, or we're going to reiterate some of the things you talked about. So there is times, like we discussed in the PowerPoint, that it is better to lease versus buy a car. Very few times in my opinion, because most of the time you want to hold on to a car as long as you can because cars are a depreciating asset. But if you do like the new features and you are going to buy a new car every year or every couple years, you might be better off leasing. So you always want to weigh the pros and cons of each before you make any decision. The same goes with renting and buying. When I was a student like where you're sitting, I would have said there's no time you should ever rent. You should always buy because you're always going to lose money renting. You're throwing it away. Until I moved to Florida and bought during the height and had to sell during the low times. And I lost a whole lot more money than I would have if I had just rented. So there are certain times where it is better if you're not sure that you're going to stay for 3 to 5 years. That if you're single and you think there's a chance you could be getting married, you might want to wait until you know that you're going to be in a more permanent situation before you do go ahead and purchase that house. The other thing that we're going to be discussing is credit card debt. It's one of Dave Ramsey's things that he speaks very firm about as well, and we'll be discussing that in your biblical response. But just how to get out of consumer debt, how to make sure to avoid things like credit card debt. Credit card debt is probably the worst kind of debt because there's such high interest rates that go along with that. And like we learned back in Module 2, the higher their interest rate, the more you're paying out, especially if it stays on there more than a month or two. Your minimum payment is just going to pay on the interest. You're not actually paying down any of the principal. One other thing we're going to talk about is credit scores. I get a lot of questions just from personal friends and also in the class about credit scores. How important is it to have a good credit score, and what do I do to improve it? I'll tell you from working in a bank, it is an extremely long mathematical equation, and it doesn't always make sense. Certain things I will tell you is that if you open a lot of store credit cards, usually more than 2 or 3, so if you have a credit card for every store you like when they offer you that 20%, it hurts your credit score. After you pass like 2 or 3 of them, it starts hurting your credit because you have too much available credit to be able to borrow against. You do actually want to put stuff on there. You don't want to have a credit card out and never use it. That doesn't help your credit score. It does help you to have a credit card, and there's some people who would say you should never get a credit card. If you are looking to build credit, you have to have some sort of the credit score tells people how responsible you are. So you have to have some sort of way to show them that you will pay back what you've borrowed, and that's why they like seeing that you've actually borrowed. A credit card is the easiest, quickest way to show that. You can do it with utilities, you can do it with some other things like car payments, but if you're a college student and you don't have a place yet and you don't have utilities, the easiest thing you can do is to get a credit card. Like we've talked about with the rest of consumer debt. That's why credit cards have become such a problem. People take them out just to use it to build up their credit score, but they don't pay them off, which actually hurts you in the long run. If you decide to follow Dave Ramsey's plan and never buy a car, other than using cash, and never buy a house using cash, credit score is irrelevant. Those are the times you need it. But most of us don't have a couple $100,000 to go buy a house, all in cash. We're going to need to have a loan. If you have a loan, the interest rate is very much determined by your credit score. So it is very important to have a good credit score when you go to look at buying a house and having a mortgage. The same thing goes true for car loans. They use that credit score in determining what kind of interest rate you're going to get. And when you're talking about 5 or 30-year loans, when you're talking about a house, it's huge if the difference between a 5 and a 6% on the rate that you get. So it is important to have a good credit score. But you do have to be responsible when you're trying to build that credit score, i.e. if you get a credit card, do not abuse it. Make sure that you are paying it off in full every month.